Good afternoon. My name is Mari Ulate. I'm a therapist over at Calculated Psychological Services. Thank you all so much for attending today's workshop, a health and wellness workshop, effective communication in the workplace. We have both a live and virtual audience today, thanks to the VETI grant, which has made this possible. Before we start, I would also like to thank our host, Dr. Ariana Hume, who is the director of the Museum of Anthropology, where we are broadcasting our workshop from today. The CSUSB Anthropology Museum is partnering with the nonprofit Ulate project. It's an organization working to fight the stigmas associated with addiction, to improve treatment access. The exhibition features the stories of 41 individuals between the ages of 14 and 55, each of whom have lost their life to drug addiction or drug poisoning in the state of California. So I encourage all of our audience to take time to check out this moving exhibit. All right, so let's dive into our workshop. Okay, so today we're going to be going over quite a few things. I'm going to talk about the different communication styles. I'm going to briefly review that just because I have gone into that in more detail in a previous workshop, as well as active listening, like what that looks like, the I statement, avoiding communication pitfalls. Again, that will be a brief overview because I go that into more detail in previous workshops, but it still plays a role, you know, those are still the foundations of communication, still things we need to keep in mind. We're just gonna tweak it for this different setting. I'm going to talk about different leadership styles, different followership styles, how to establish boundaries in the workplace, and then also how to de-escalate an argument if things are starting to escalate. So I really like this quote, and I share this in every workshop with communication because I think this is very, very important to keep in mind. The aim of an argument or discussion should not be victory, but progress. Right. And so I always really like to reiterate that because I think what happens in a lot of communication misunderstandings or disagreements is that people are trying to really communicate their point, and it sometimes gets to crosses the line of wanting to communicate and be heard and maybe even feel right. But that's not the goal of communication, right? We're not trying to be right or win the discussion. We're trying to achieve progress, increase understanding. So just briefly, the different communication styles. We have four main types: aggressive, passive-aggressive, and assertive. And we're always trying to shoot for assertive communication, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But aggressive communication, that's usually where someone could be very like escalated, maybe use a more aggressive body language, aggressive tone. Like you could tell that they are physically and verbally communicating that they're upset, and maybe using very harsh, not only tone, but words, you know, so maybe very accusatory, maybe very, again, everything in their tone is communicating that they're upset. Usually the goal of that is that they're trying to, not always, maybe it's unintentionally, but can come off as being very intimidating to the receiver. Passive, that's more where that communication style, that's like the person may feel like if you're in that situation, like you're trying to pull information out of the other person, you know, like they're not being very direct, they're being, you're feeling like you're having some misinformation, you're trying to be direct with them or trying to clear things up, but you're not getting much feedback. And so that's what passive can look like. Passive aggressive is, you know, a combination of both. And I think we are all familiar with that, right? And that's what someone is making maybe like rude comments, and they're kind of be indirect, but really vague. And they kind of leaves you wondering, like, is that about me? Is that about someone else? And that's what's really tough with passive aggressive comments, is that it leaves the receiver being very confused. And then the last one that we're striving to achieve is assertive. So assertive is direct, kind of like aggressive, but not in an aggressive manner. So we're still going to be respectful. We're still going to be courteous, but we're not going to be indirect or dance around the issue like maybe passive and passive aggressive does. We will communicate directly what we're trying to express. Another big part of it is active listening. So just really briefly, in active listening, we want to try to enter the conversation with no judgment. And I really, really want to stress that because again, I know there could be a lot of emotions when we're trying to talk about something with someone and we may feel like they're not understanding us or they may be there try to attack us. So really just trying to walk in and be like, I'm not going to judge your feelings or your values or your opinion on the situation. I'm just here to listen. And really trying to listen without trying to respond. And I think that's another big thing of active listening is that a lot of people get caught up in the, I'm hearing you, but I'm hearing you and I'm thinking, well, I have something to say to that, and I have something to say to that, and that's not right, and I want to correct that. And that's not active listening. Active listening is really, again, trying as much as you can to be like, I'm going to really try to understand what they're telling me, even if, again, I don't agree with it. Really try to understand so you can able to reflect back. And what that means is you're able to say, I hear you telling me this. I can see that you're mad because of this. I can see that this is important to you because of this. So with that, we want to use door openers, open-ended questions, provide non-committal acknowledgements. That means like you're showing your body language, like nodding your head, say to show that you understand and that you're listening to them. Allowing silence, sometimes allowing people to a time to collect their thoughts. And like I mentioned before, paraphrase and summarize. So right now we're going to dive into a poll. So I talked about the different types of communication styles, and I would love to hear from you all. Which communication style do you usually use? Like, again, I know depending on the situation, you know, maybe we're more assertive with our family, but we feel more passive at school or at work. So I understand that communication style can fluctuate depending on the setting and the people. However, just in general, which communication style do you usually use? So what you could do is text Mari Ulate to 37607 or respond at the link above, pollev.com/Mari Ulate 142. So we're already getting some responses. I'm going to give it another minute or so for people to join and respond. All right, so I'm seeing everyone. I'm going to give it a few more seconds. And I appreciate everyone taking time to reflect and just be honest. You know, I know for myself, of course, I always strive to use assertive communication, but I'm going to be honest in my romantic relationship. When I get frustrated, I'll be honest, I tend to default to passive aggressive, something I've tried to, you know, work on, which is all we can do. I really wanted to normalize it again. That's human. It's natural. There's nothing, there's no shame in that. It's just constantly just trying to be aware and make improvements. So what I'm seeing is 25% of you identified as passive communication style. I'm seeing now numbers are going up for passive aggressive at 22%. A small amount, 3% aggressive, 9% assertive, and then majority, which makes sense, is more than one of the above. Okay. Thank you so much for your participation. So we're going to talk about how to respond to non-assertive communication. And so what I mean by that is whether it's passive, passive aggressive, or assertive. So big thing, remaining calm, use active listening, use the I statements to describe understanding of the situation. I'm going to briefly cover the I statements. So this is a great formula for that. It's I feel, and we insert a feeling, not a thought, a feeling. I feel frustrated. I feel upset. I feel sad because of what happened or when this happened. and what you need. So for example, I feel frustrated that you came late and I need you to be on time because we're running out of time to complete this project and I'm worried. So you can see how you could mix or match it. It doesn't have to be as stiff. I want it to feel natural. But really communicating what you're feeling, what is the reason, and what triggered that reason, and what you need. And the need is really important. Follow it up with a clear directive, like, I need this to happen. I need to, maybe then if the person arrived late, then we need to work on this longer. A fair request. So let's try it out. That can be really hard. So you are working with your classmate or coworker to develop a presentation, but you feel like you're carrying the load. How did you address them using the I statement? So again, I feel when this happens because, and what you need. And I really like to take the time for people to think about it, practice it, because if it's hard right now when we're calm and just, talking about it, it's even harder in the moment, right? When again, we might genuinely feel really frustrated, more elevated. So again, it takes time, it takes practice. Give you guys some grace. Okay, we have a response. I feel that I should have to be carrying the majority of the load. That's a good attempt, but I still want to see the feeling. What do you feel? Do you feel frustrated? Do you feel overwhelmed? Do you feel worried? Want to insert a feeling. I feel overloaded and stressed when you don't submit your contribution on time. That's great. I feel frustrated that I carried the load of this presentation. I really like this one. You added the need. I need you to do more. Oops, sorry about that. Oops, I keep messing with it. I feel frustrated because I'm carrying the majority of the load on this project. I need you to be more involved. I feel a little frustrated when you make me do most of the work. I feel, again, I'm seeing some people that were missing the feelings, and these are all really great attempts. Again, it makes sense. This is a new skill. It's going to take a couple tries before you guys get the hang of it. Okay, I feel anxious. That's a great one when most of the load is on me. And then again, communicating a need. What do you need from that person? That's the idea. I feel overwhelmed because I'm carrying the majority of the load. I need more help. Great, that's great. So I'm gonna give you a couple more tries. I feel frustrated because I'm carrying the majority of the load. I would like to have help on sharing the workload. That's great. So these are all really good examples, guys. I appreciate you participating. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next part. So now I'm going to talk about avoiding communication pitfalls. So these are mistakes that can actually escalate misunderstanding. So again, I talked about these in more detail in another presentation, but I'm just going to briefly touch on it. So this is widely researched by actually a couples therapist. His name is Dr. John and Julie Gottman, their husband and wife. So even though this plays out in relationships, like romantic relationships, I find that these four areas are still relevant in any relationship. We can make these mistakes in any relationship when we're trying to communicate. And he really did, they did a lot of research to show that these, they call it the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, consistently using this in a relationship, it leads to a high likelihood that the couple will divorce or separate. So again, I know that's for a romantic relationship, but really wanting to illustrate how destructive this can be in a relationship when you're trying to communicate. So the 4 ones are criticizing, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So the first one, criticizing. That's different than offering a critique or voicing a complaint. So usually when we're criticizing, that means we can attack maybe the person's character or something about them, as opposed to just generally just offering a complaint about the situation. So for example, a person arrives late. A criticism would be, you're always running late, you're not being considerate. And you see how I said you're not being considerate, you are now attacking them. You're saying a you statement, you're saying something about the quality of them. And again, that's could be put the person in a defensive mode and saying like, what do you mean I'm not considerate, right? It could, and that's what I mean, where it can really just escalate and snowball into something not productive. So we want to aim for complain without blame. So what that would look like is, for example, I see that you got here late again, and again, using that I statement, I feel really frustrated because we talked about this and I need you to be on time because I was worried, or I need you to communicate with me if you're running late because I was worried. So something along those lines. Like again, we're keeping about the situation. You're making neutral observations about what has happened before. Like we've talked about this. We agreed to this. I need you to do this. Another one of the horsemen is defensiveness. So for example, it's a response to criticism. So when we feel accused, we fish for excuses and play the innocent victim so that the other person will back off, right? And what we want to aim for instead is taking responsibility. So for example, let's say the other person hears that, and maybe it's not like the best feedback, right? But if they want to maybe provide that antidote, right? We're trying to de-escalate it. We could say, I apologize, that's my bad. You did ask me to communicate with you, and I should have done that. I'm sorry. However, this is what's going on. Like I couldn't, or I was on a very important phone call and I couldn't voice text, and I was driving, whatever it may be. But at least taking some responsibility as opposed to saying, well, you don't even know what's going on in my life. Like you don't even ask me. There's a reason. So see, now you start getting defensive and we're escalating the situation. Another one of the 4 horsemen is contempt, treating others with disrespect, sarcasm, calling them names. So really you're communicating verbally or with body language, some form of disrespect. So maybe you're like sighing, like, and you're kind of showing this vibe of like, here we go, or you're rolling your eyes or something like that. So one of the antidote is building a culture of appreciation. So again, I hear you. I hear you that it must be really, really frustrating. And again, I'm not perfect. We all do this, right? Where this maybe has come up multiple times in any relationship and we're over it. And it's really hard to not let that frustration show in a disrespectful way, but trying to remind yourself of like building a culture of appreciation. So for example, like trying to remind yourself like, okay, like, I don't like maybe the way they work. I don't like how they're so disorganized, but they do good work. And we just got to figure out a better way to get around this, right? So that frustration doesn't seep out into something that's coming across as disrespectful. And then stonewalling. It's a result of being physiologically flooded. So what that means is maybe a person's feeling overwhelmed and they're just shutting down. They're like, I'm being attacked. I don't know what to say to you. So I'm not going to say anything at all. And we're just going to shut down or walk away. So an antidote to that is what we want is to take a break. Take a break to cool off, calm down. You can communicate that. You're saying, this is a little too much for me. I need a couple minutes. And then I could come back and try to figure this out with you. So let's try it out. Another practice. So you're at work and your coworker starts to criticize the way you're doing things again, right? So really try to visualize that. Maybe they're really nitpicky and they keep trying to say like, it should be like this or be like this, really fussy about it. And they keep trying to tell you what to do. Provide an example of a complaint. Right, so we want to avoid criticizing them. We want to try to aim for a complaint without putting blame on them or showing any contempt in that communication. Okay, I don't like how you micromanage me because I do know how to do these tasks well. Okay, that's pretty clear. I'm wondering if we can use a little bit more of the I statement, use a feeling in there. And a request. See what you mean. I will try to do that next time. I think that could be helpful depending on the situation. If you know that maybe you are too triggered and you can't get into it with them, and if you do, it would escalate things. I could see how saying that for now and addressing it at a later time would be more productive. When you tell me all the things I'm doing wrong, I feel overwhelmed. I need to feel respected in how you communicate me. That's really good. I would offer maybe a little bit more direct, like maybe, for example, I would appreciate you, maybe I would appreciate you minimizing your feedback. It just makes me, like you said, feel overwhelmed and feeling like I can't do anything right, and it's not helpful to me. So again, that's very specific of saying, this is what I need from you. I feel inadequate when you continue commenting on my work. Could you please try offering constructive critique? That's really good. I love that. So see how we're saying we're adding a feeling, you're like communicating to the person. You're making me feel this way. When you do this, I need this. I would appreciate if you stop criticizing me, because when you do, it makes me feel overwhelmed, and then I end up doing a worse job. That's great. That's another great way. Again, we're being direct. We're not beating around the bush. We're communicating what we're feeling, how it's not helpful, what we need from that other person. I understand what you're saying. I would feel a lot better if I was given an example and specifically what I'm doing wrong. All right, so you're showing that you're open to feedback, but that's what the feedback you're getting right now is not helpful. I feel frustrated when you're criticizing my work, and I need you to explain what I'm doing wrong instead of criticizing me. It was a really good example, guys. So I'm gonna move it along in the interest of time. So I mentioned calming strategies before. And again, this is really, really brief, but this is gonna be a key role, I think, in any situation. When we're trying to communicate something and we're feeling frustrated, we're feeling, again, overwhelmed, maybe we're feeling upset because, again, this has been an ongoing issue. Maybe we're feeling attacked, like, for example, what happened in that previous scenario, like, this keeps happening. You keep making me feel like crap, like I can't do anything right. And it's really, really, again, triggering. So keeping in mind of trying to keep ways to keep yourself calm. Again, really briefly, like taking deep breaths. There's specific strategies of how to do deep breathing to actually calm yourself down. What I tell my clients is using the 6-4-6. You inhale for 6 seconds, hold it for 4, exhale for 6 seconds. It really does make a difference using a strategy like that. Maybe, again, like what I mentioned, if you're feeling overwhelmed, communicating, I need a break, I need to take a walk, and actually do that. Walk outside, really zoning into what you see outside to help calm you down. And that can involve using grounding techniques, using your senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you smell? What do you taste? Listening to music, if that's your thing, it's really going to be tapping into what's soothing for you. Or maybe even guided imagery, visualizing a relaxing, soothing place. All right, responding to non-assertive communication. Now we're going to get into more like work-specific stuff about leadership styles. This is something that I researched just because I was wondering, again, in romantic relationships, we have, I don't know if any of you are familiar with love languages. There's love languages in the way we communicate our love and appreciation, not only in romantic relationships, but even in the parent-child relationships or with friends. Some of us like to show that we care about a person by giving gifts, or we tell them, or we are more physical, like give them hugs or different things like that. So there's more on that. But I was curious to understand if there was also ways we interact with our coworkers or also with our supervisors at work, right? Those styles, those preferences must translate over into the work setting. And so that's when I was learning and researching about the different leadership styles. So we have 5 different styles: authoritarian, participative, delegative, transactional, transformational. So authoritarian is kind of like what it sounds. That type of leader is usually can be kind of strict to kind of tell people what to do. They believe that they should really, maybe it could feel kind of coming across as like micromanaging, like they're going to tell them, this is what I think you should do. There's very little room for autonomy or creativity. They have an idea of what their employees should do and they expect them to do it. Participative leadership is more like a democracy. So maybe this kind of leader, they value feedback from their staff or employees. And so, and that, like, just like a democracy where everyone gets a vote, that's what they seek from their staff members. They want to hear feedback from staff members, and they use that feedback in order to make decisions. A delegative leadership is more, they offer more autonomy to their employees. Like they trust that their employees got this, and that they actually genuinely think that if you give people autonomy, they are capable and they will handle their work, and that will also foster creativity. That leadership, I could see, it could be very helpful, for example, maybe in like remote work opportunities, right? Someone's working remote and they're like, I trust that you got this and you know what to do. And they need very little instruction from the supervisor. Transactional leadership is, again, a little bit more of like the micromanaging, but not like in an authoritarian, I expect you to do this, but just more like very structured, very organized. They have like goals, expectations for the team to meet, but not like in a punitive way. They're just that extra micromanaging maybe. And that could be very helpful maybe for some people that might need more direction. Maybe some people are like, I need to be told what to do. Like, I need to know like what we're aiming for. I need more input. So it's that kind of leadership where they're providing all that, where that could be a good match. And then transformational leadership. That's more where they try to inspire their employees. Again, they really kind of like the delegative and fostering creativity, but they believe even more in that. So they might be real visionary and want their employees' feedback of like, how can we like change this company and change how we are serving? So again, very visionary. So I know not all of us identify as being a leader, but sometimes if a situation calls for it, we may have to step into that leadership role, or we find ourselves in that leadership role. So based off of the descriptions, which leadership style do you identify with? Thank you everyone for participating and taking part in the poll. Getting a lot of good answers. So I'm seeing, it looks like a majority of you, as of right now, 56% identify with participative. Very small amount identify with our authoritarian, 5%, now 8%. The next largest category is delegative, and transactional and transformational. Okay, good. So, excuse me, I appreciate all of you like taking time to reflect and really identifying, because again, that will be very important information to have if you ever find yourself in that role, or if you know that maybe that's how your supervisor is, and now you know how they are. That could inform how maybe you provide feedback and what will be a good fit for you, which leads us to the different followership styles. So again, there's 5 different ones: exemplary, conformist, passive, alienated, and pragmatist. So exemplary, the way it's described is like those people who are really engaged and real go-getters. So maybe even like people pleasing, but in the work setting, you might see them like go above and beyond and do the extra work and like, right, yeah, I'm going to jump in and be first one in and last one now. So that's an example of exemplary followership. So they're very engaged and they're going to be a team player and actively contribute. Conformist followership. So that might be more like, for example, they are engaged, they are committed. However, they might not be able to take as much initiative. So this kind of followership is where they might need more instruction, more guidance from their superior. So that's why I said they conform, as in they're willing to do whatever they need to do as long as they have some instruction to do it. Passive followership. So this is more, there's kind of low engagement, like they're not as like gung-ho, and they're also not as maybe open to feedback. So they'll just kind of like go along with it, if that makes sense. They're just very passive in their participation. Alienated. So this is one where maybe they are self-starters, like they know what maybe they think is good for the organization or company, but they may not necessarily be as engaged. So maybe they might be a little bit more cynical, maybe a little bit checked out with the company. And again, it might be just because it might not be a good fit, or maybe it's the work culture, but that is another type of followership. And then there's pragmatic. So that's one where it's like more in the middle. It's like a happy medium of like you're engaged, but not like super over exerting yourself. And then you also engage in the sense of like you are participating in the company's values and beliefs or goals. But again, it's not to an extreme. So it's just like a happy medium. So again, wanting to hear from you all, when you do fall in that followership, which ones do you identify with? Thank you everyone for participating in the polls. This is really good info. It makes sense. I'm seeing high numbers for exemplary and conformist, 28 and 31% respectively. And then the next highest category is pragmatic at 17%, alienated at 14%, and passive at 11%. So that makes sense. So I really want you guys to like take this information and keep that in mind, because as you can see, there could be some times when, depending on who your leadership style and also who you need to lead, or maybe who's your superior and who you're trying to follow, there can be that mismatch in leadership and following. The same way there's sometimes a mismatch in our own personal relationships, and someone's expecting more, again, physical touch or verbal praise, and they're not getting it. And the other person's like, well, I'm trying to show you that I appreciate you, but in this ways, there could be that same mismatch happening in the work setting of like, there's maybe the superiors thinking, man, I'm giving you a lot of instruction. I'm telling you what to do. I feel like I'm very clear and letting you know what you need to do. And the other person's like, this is too much. Like, I just need my own space. I need autonomy. I need to have the freedom and creativity to do what I need to do. So I think this could be very helpful information to kind of keeping that in mind, just like how people have different learning styles. And I firmly believe that we need to adapt to their learning styles as teachers or professors or presenters. We can't just be like, well, I just lecture and you just have to adjust to me. No, we have to adjust to the student. We have to give them kinesthetic, audio, visual. So same thing, to make any relationship work, trying to be mindful of how these things, how you can modify your style and meet everyone's needs, and maybe even having discussions about that. So boundaries and barriers. So that does fall into boundaries, right? Boundaries are guidelines, rules, or limits that a person creates to identify them for themselves what's reasonable, safe, and permissible. So that's going to inform other people of ways to behave around them and how they will respond when someone steps outside of those limits, okay? So there's different areas: physical, emotional, mental. And just like how we talk about having boundaries within your personal relationships, and we talk about boundaries in like the work-life balance, this is gonna get a little bit more concrete as to how you can do that. So for example, physical is your body, your sense of personal space, your workspace, expectations for how people interact with you. So for example, an example of a physical boundary would be maybe to physically show, like maybe you have your headphones in and you're showing, I can't engage right now, I'm busy. I'm showing you physically that I need this time to focus and to do my work. Maybe another example of a physical boundary is if someone needs to borrow something, you let them know when you would like to have it back. So really, again, creating a very clear, like, yes, I don't mind sharing this with you, but I need it back because that's your personal item. Excuse me, emotional, so beliefs, behaviors, choices, sense of responsibility, and ability to be intimate with others. So maybe an example of an emotional boundary at work would be if unfortunately it happens everywhere. I think there could be some drama or toxicity. It's inevitable. I think you're always going to find that. So maybe taking that step to be like, I'm choosing to not engage in that. I'm going to keep my emotional distance from that. Is it, yes, frustrating that you have to come to work every day? Because for most of us, that's the case, right? Monday to Friday, we're coming to work and we're dealing and feeling all of that energy and we don't want to, but trying as much as possible to be like, that's their stuff, not mine. I'm here to do my job and I'm going to do a good job. And if they're having a problem, that's on them if they, again, don't want to communicate or hash it out directly. So mental, supporting your mental energy helps you focus when you're working. So for example, that could be showing that you're trying to, again, having those boundaries of, and this time, this is where I work and this is where I'm going to devote my mental energy. And then outside of this time, like for example, at lunch, for sure taking that lunch and giving yourself that mental space or break, conserving your mental energy. And like I said, also not working off the clock, again, conserving that mental energy, not overexerting yourself. So this is where we're going to tie it all in together, right? So before I switch to the slide, we're going to tie all the pieces together of being mindful of the I statement, of trying to communicate what you're feeling, what you need, and maybe also implementing a boundary, right? Because I think the big part that can happen in workplaces, like what I mentioned, the other example, the other poll, maybe someone keeps doing something over and over again, and you really find that frustrating. So part of it is, yes, communicating that, but now we're also going to add in the boundary of, again, you're communicating what is acceptable around you, right? What you are willing to take. So if you don't want someone speaking to you in a certain way, it is absolutely within your right to respectfully and directly communicate that and show like, hey, if this happens, like, I'm not going to tolerate that. So here's the example of your coworker keeps insinuating some staff not pulling their weight with the workload, but you're not sure if they mean you or others. How would you address the issue and communicate your boundaries? Right? So maybe they keep making like little snippy comments like, oh man, if others would just do more, or others keep calling out sick. And because it's so indirect and ambiguous, you're like, are they talking about me? And it creates, again, that toxic of like, I'm not sure, do they have a problem with me? Is it someone else? And that adds to the toxicity in the work environment, right? Because you're not being very clear. So being able to directly address that, because even if they don't mean it about you, because you're hearing that constantly, you're being affected, right? And so maybe wanting to directly address them, like, look, I'm tired of hearing this. I want to have a direct conversation of like what I need and what we can do about this. I know this is really hard. It's everything together. So take your time. I would ask to talk about how you best proceed to fix things. It seems like we're miscommunicating. Can we discuss what's going on and problem solve? Yeah, that's really good. Really just directly saying, it sounds like something's amiss. Let's talk about it. Let's solve it. Okay, that's a mess. I'm confused by your complaint. Could you be clearer? I want to look at all the responses without messing up the slide. Feel anxious when you make these kind of statements. I'd appreciate if you would have a private conversation with me. I feel confused. What do you mean by that? Should we talk about this? It would help to speak directly and find a solution. So yeah, I really like that too. You're naming it, right? And you're also putting in that boundary of like, I don't like this passive aggressive communication that we have going on. If we're gonna do this, or if you're gonna say these kind of comments around me, either it's not gonna be around me, or I need you to be direct with me, or you could keep those. And that is a boundary. That is you holding that boundary of not being emotionally or mentally drained by having to deal with these like constant little behaviors or comments or rude remarks, whatever it may be. You are putting in that boundary of like, we either discuss this directly, or I can't be the person you make these comments to. So I'm getting a lot of good feedback on this. See, I feel confused when I hear that staff aren't pulling their weight because it feels like it was a comment about me. Could we talk about the issue? That's good. Yeah. I'm really liking the feedback, guys. Can you please let me know if it is me? If so, can you let me know how I can be more helpful? Yeah. These are really great examples of you guys saying it directly, respectfully, communicating what you need. You need to have a direct conversation. I really, really love this. And I get it that's awkward, right? When anytime we want to directly address someone, especially when it's dropped like that in such an indirect way, you're like, great, what do I do with those kind of things? Or maybe someone is being intentionally rude, so you can flip it the other way. Maybe they are being maybe not as openly aggressive, but they are constantly saying rude comments. Again, maybe your boundary is, and appropriately so, I need you to speak to me respectfully. I'm more than happy to talk this out with you. However, I need you to speak to me calmly and with respect, because I am feeling, upset when you speak to me that way. So again, I'm using the I statement, I'm communicating a need, and in that need is a boundary. You are communicating, it is not okay for you to speak to me this way or treat me this way respectfully, but you are communicating that. We're at the point now where we're going to take attendance, so take a minute. We still have more of the presentation. The presentation is not over, but right now, here's where we're going to take attendance, and you scan the QR code, or you use the website below, surveymonkey.com, and please make sure to enter your professor's last name and the course name. So for example, Brown for English 201. Let's take a minute to do all that. And I believe the link will also be dropped in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to leave it up for a few more seconds, but if you don't have a chance to scan it with your phone, the link will be in the chat. All right. So I wanted to take also some time to acknowledge some barriers in the workplace. Like, I understand that, again, it's hard. It's hard to be direct. It's hard to assert yourself, communicate assertively, assert your needs. And I wanted to acknowledge all the different reasons why. So just in general, it's already uncomfortable, I think, to have those conversations, but then there are these extra things that can add to that level of discomfort or anxiety and make it even harder for you to voice your concerns. So for example, the workplace culture doesn't value open communication. So maybe that could be just the culture, unfortunately, of that job, is that is how things are communicated. Things are done passive aggressively. Things are done in a backhanded way. And you really feel like you're just on defense and on guard at all times. And that I really want to validate that could be so stressful. It could be very scary to be direct and try to correct this when you're not sure if you may receive retaliation in one form or another. Speaking on the retaliation, again, that power differential between staff and supervisors. Again, it's really hard to just have that conversation with a colleague or a coworker, someone who's like on your level, power-wise, seniority-wise. It's another thing to give that feedback to your superior, to know that, like, man, they could do something. They could make my life harder. They could write me up. They could do other things, hand me tasks or workload that makes it more difficult for me. So again, really wanting to acknowledge that could be really difficult. Maybe there's just not enough time and attention, maybe unintentionally or intentionally, you're really busy at work, everyone's really busy at work, and there really isn't time given and attention given to have these honest conversations. Maybe it's not their intention to be dismissive, but there isn't enough priority given to make time and space to make sure we can talk about things and again, continue to promote a healthy working environment. Lack of follow through. So again, wanting to validate that. Maybe conversations are had and things feel like they're resolved and nothing is done. So it could be really discouraging that I'm trying to communicate, I'm trying to be direct and express my needs, but nothing happens. And so of course, people are gonna be discouraged, shut down, give up. And also personal values and culture. So for some people, it might be really, really hard to speak up. And that could just be because maybe they're more shy, maybe culturally, it's really hard for them to address their superiors or their elders because they're growing up thinking that's disrespectful if I talk back. They're in a position of seniority. I have to go along with what they say. I have to show respect in different ways, or I have to do what they ask me to do. So again, really wanted to validate that not only is it just learning communication styles, there are these cultural values that we may have or personal values that make it really hard and feel like we're going against the grain or being disrespectful and puts us out of our comfort zone. So again, really wanted to validate that. So again, I know it may not always be safe to do so, but trying to talk about it, like what I mentioned earlier, sharing your styles, communicating your boundaries, agreeing to a plan of roles and responsibilities, and using, again, those assertive communication skills we've been practicing during these discussions. And I always hear this a lot, but what happens when they don't respond well? And I hear you, I hear that, I know that can be a concern. Unfortunately, it's true, it's possible that you can set up the discussion as pretty and politely and respectfully as you can. That doesn't mean that they may respond that way too. And unfortunately, that's just the truth in any situation, We hope that by using these skills and tips, you're making the person less defensive. You're showing them that you're willing to listen to them because you're using that active listening. But there's no guarantee. These communication styles are just for you to practice the healthy communication skills, but that doesn't mean that's going to change the other person and make them practice it too, or reciprocate that. But we hope it will, and will, like I said, at least not escalate a situation. So here are just some examples of how you can respond to different communication styles. So for example, if someone's being very aggressive with you, I feel upset because this discussion is too heated and I need to take a break. I need us to calmly discuss the issue. That's the boundary. Then I can resume the discussion. So you're holding that boundary, like, I'm willing to talk to you about this, but if it's not done calmly or respectfully, I'm not going to. Passive, maybe I feel confused because it seems like I'm missing some information that would be helpful for this conversation. I need both of us to share openly and honestly. Then I would like to continue this discussion. So again, you're putting that boundary that you're showing, I'm not going to keep getting roped into this if we're not going to be open and honest. Passive aggressive, maybe I feel drained because this discussion is going around in circles or disrespectful comments are being made. I need both of us to share openly and respectfully, then I would like to resolve this misunderstanding. I know it's a mouthful and I know it's hard to, again, use those words in the heat of the moment, but these are good examples of using those assertive communication skills and putting in those boundaries and needs or requests. So this is just a brief summary of everything we're talking about: remaining calm, using the active listening, using the I statements, trying to avoid the communication mistakes, right? Not trying to get defensive or criticize, keeping in mind the different leadership or followership styles, maintaining the boundaries, stepping away if you need to, and calming strategies. So now we have a few minutes left for questions. While we answer some questions on the chat, I'm going to have this up, the survey. So if you take this survey, you will be entered to into our equal opportunity drawing to receive a $25 Amazon gift card. So again, you can use the link surveymonkey.com or scan the QR code. So I'll give you some time to do that. And meanwhile, I'm going to check the Q&A for any questions that may have come up. And again, the link will be dropped in the chat. So if you miss this, also allowing it to be on the polls if you guys don't feel comfortable verbally asking me any questions. So you can drop it in the Q&A via Zoom. You can put it up here so we can see your question. If you want to keep your question private, you could drop it in the Q&A via Zoom. If any of the audience members have any questions, you can ask me verbally if you feel comfortable. Oh, thank you for the feedback. I appreciate it. You know, someone that said, love this talk. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? For the comment, I appreciate it. It says, thank you for taking the time. What do I do if my words get stuck when I talk? I think it's okay, you know, to communicate that. Just say, sorry, I'm struggling to put my words together, put my thoughts together. Give me a minute, you know, use some of that calming strategies. My work group needs this talk. I feel like a lot of, I think, work settings do. This is rarely given time. And that's why I wanted to validate that, you know. Usually people are just hired on and they're like, here's what you need to do, and you just do it. How do I remain effective in bringing changes if their way is not working? I think that can be tough just because we might not be able to affect change within the organization. I really want to, again, acknowledge that there's a system, just like we have other systems in our society, there's systems at work. And that might be the work culture or the way they handle things, and you might not be able to make a change. However, you can make that change for yourself as best as you can, of like, what boundaries can you implement so that even though things aren't changing, maybe things are still toxic or people aren't receptive, what boundaries can you put in for yourself so you're not being drained by that? So you're not putting constantly emotional and mental energy trying to make those changes or trying to put more effort when it's not going to be reciprocated. So I think more about that in terms of if you're trying to make these changes and not happening, then what can you do to take care of yourself? We're almost at time. Any other questions? All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for those who attended live and via Zoom. Really appreciate you. And come to some more of our workshops. We have a lot more. Thank you.